The disappearance of a college student in New York triggered an international manhunt to find her killer.
When Binghamton University nursing student Haley Anderson first disappeared from her off-campus apartment in March 2018.
And all his friends had received word from the U.S. that he was wanted for this murder.
Today we'll talk about the tragic case of Haley Anderson, a nursing student at Binghamton University in the United States who was strangled by a fellow student and a romantic interest at the time. This is the case of Haley Anderson. Welcome back to True Crime Files. We send our condolences to her friends and family and truly hope cases like this will never happen again. Anderson was murdered on March 8, 2018. The murder suspect escaped to Nicaragua, where he was captured by Nicaraguan police and finally convicted of femicide. Firstly, let's find out more about Haley Anderson. Haley Anderson was born in Westbury, New York. She was the daughter of Karen and Gordon Anderson, and older sister to Madeline Anderson. In March of 2018, when the tragedy happened, she was 22 years old and a fifth-year senior. While attending Binghamton University, she worked at Jazzman's, a campus coffee shop, for over 3 years. She planned to graduate in May of 2018 and had a job lined up at a Long Island emergency room. Friends described Anderson as hard-working, friendly, and compassionate, and like the kind of a person who really liked music. She was a straight-A student at Binghamton University when she was accepted into their nursing program. In March of 2018, a couple months before graduation, Karen was expecting her daughter to visit her at home. This is how Karen described that period of her daughter's life. She had worked so hard and done so well, and I was going to give her a big party. She made out this really long list of everyone that she was going to invite. Kevin Ocampo, who was also a Binghamton student around that time, was Haley's boyfriend for a while. He recalls her wanting to be a nurse more than anything else. And when asked if he thinks she loved him and wanted to be with him, he said she did, but she first wanted to graduate and experience some real freedom. So, what happened on the day of the murder, and how? It was early March of 2018, and a day like any other, when Haley Anderson disappeared from her off-campus apartment. Her close friend and roommate, Josie Artin, wasn't that alarmed at first. She simply had no reason to think something terrible had happened. It seemed like a typical student life full of spontaneous decisions and ideas. Back in Haley's hometown of Westbury, New York, her mother Karen wasn't aware her 22-year-old daughter was missing. Her daughter was fiercely independent, and Karen would only call her once a week, usually on Sunday. Anderson's mother described her daughter as a free spirit, but the next day, when there was still no trace of Haley, Artin and another roommate used the Find My Friends app to track her phone to the apartment of fellow nursing student Orlando Tercero, and became very concerned. Artin went to Orlando's apartment in search of her friend. When no one answered the door, she climbed through a window and found Haley's body. Orlando was nowhere to be found. Investigators soon located surveillance footage, which captured Orlando and Haley entering his apartment. Who was the potential suspect? Was it Orlando? Could it be Kevin Ocampo? Or another person completely? Orlando Tercero was born in Miami, Florida, and raised in Nicaragua, where his family is from. He was a good student from a wealthy family and was also enrolled in the nursing program. Jesse Bua, who was also a nursing student and one of Orlando's roommates and best friends, commented, "He liked to work hard in school during the weekdays. On the weekends, he liked to go out, have a few drinks, meet up with some friends, and always liked to dance." Also kind of similar to Haley in that sense. Haley and Orlando first met in class, but didn't become friends until Haley's fourth year at school, when they crossed paths at a party at Kevin's off-campus apartment. Orlando, Haley, and Kevin became closer, and Kevin even invited his new friend to join his fraternity. It seemed like a good idea for a while, until Kevin and Haley took a relationship break, and Orlando crossed a line in his friendship with Haley. Haley had some romantic moments with Orlando, but she was very clear she wasn't looking for a committed relationship. Orlando got kicked out of his fraternity group because he was sleeping with Kevin's girlfriend. And according to Karen Anderson, Haley felt guilty for that, since Orlando had statements saying he wanted to kill himself. Anderson's friend Josie Artin said Orlando started coming to their home uninvited because he felt jealous and wanted Haley to be his girlfriend. Around that time, Haley posted a Snapchat video saying the tires on her car had been slashed. Her childhood friend Sydney Matuzak was a few hundred miles away when she saw the post and saved it. It happened the day after a party at Orlando's apartment, where he learned that Haley and Kevin were in a relationship. Haley's mother, Karen, commented on the event. "I said, Haley, you need to make a police report." So the police came over. They took the information down but she wouldn't press charges because it was over $600 in damage, and it would have been considered a felony, and he would have been kicked out of the nursing school. For a while, Haley kept her distance from Orlando, but she eventually let him back into her life. Approximately 6 months after her tires were slashed, Haley went missing. Josie and another roommate, Michelle Tapali, tracked Haley's iPhone to Orlando's apartment and then climbed through a window in search of their friend. Haley had been strangled to death, and Orlando Tercero was nowhere to be found. On the afternoon of March 9th, 2018, Karen Anderson noticed 2 men in a black car parked outside of her house, who told her that her daughter had been found strangled to death in Orlando's bed. Karen recalls that moment. "I was just numb. I felt angry that I didn't push for him to be arrested for that tire slashing and that I didn't, raise more red flags for Haley with that." Binghamton Police Lieutenant Corey Miner led the search for Haley's suspected killer. There's several different cameras on the house utilized to track movements around the property. The first recording of interest to police was on Thursday, March 8th, when Haley met up with Orlando. The camera shows Anderson and Tercero walking into the residence. Nearly 7 hours after arriving with Haley, Orlando is seen clearing the driveway of garbage and leaving by himself. Using a receipt they found in his apartment, police tracked his movements to a local pharmacy, where he purchased 2 sleeping aids. Investigators believe Orlando tried to hang himself in his apartment, using hooks that were stored in the basement. But in his failed attempt, they believe he fell and hurt himself. Detectives also found a note written in Spanish, which said, "I'm really sorry about this. I never felt I could be capable of doing this." He also wrote, "Father, I'll see you soon." His father had passed 5 years earlier. Investigators thought it sounded like a killer's confession and suicide note. Surveillance cameras at the airport captured Orlando with his luggage and a bandage on his head. There, he boarded a plane heading home to Nicaragua. It happened approximately 16 hours before Haley's body was discovered. A 48 hours team of journalists traveled to Managua, Nicaragua to retrace Orlando's steps. They learned that it was Orlando's mother who picked him up at Managua's international airport and drove him to their hometown of Chinandega. For a couple of days, Orlando was supposedly hiding in the small town in the house where he grew up. 4 days after his arrival, Orlando's mother drove him to Leon to get medical attention. According to the police report, he tried to take his own life. The next day in Managua, police had a press conference informing the public that Orlando Tercero was in custody. Orlando was now waiting to be charged with a crime by Nicaraguan authorities. It was the beginning of an international fight for justice. Less than a week after Tercero's arrest, Haley's family and friends gathered in her hometown in New York to lay her to rest. Haley's father, Gordon Anderson, accepted his daughter's diploma in her honor. Broome County District Attorney Steve Cornwell immediately took steps to secure a second-degree murder indictment against Orlando. But things were complicated. Orlando had dual citizenship in the U.S. and Nicaragua, and an existing treaty does not require either country to extradite one of its own. The effort did not show much result until September of 2019, when Steve Cornwell said he got a call from the Department of Justice. Cornwell said for CBS News, "I was told, good news, bad news situation." And I said, "All right, well, what's the bad news?" "They're not going to extradite him. They're willing to try him in Nicaragua." I thought we had a snowball's chance in hell of getting a conviction in Nicaragua. In the U.S., a grand jury charged Orlando with murder in the second degree. In Nicaragua, he would be charged with committing a femicide. Femicide is defined as the murder of a woman with whom the perpetrator had a relationship. 48 Hours spoke with a group of Orlando's closest friends, such as Daniel Urcullo, Ashley Lopez, and Juan Alaman, who described Orlando as an excellent student, always being kind, caring, and incapable of killing anyone. They couldn't believe Orlando could have killed Haley or anyone else. Unlike in the U.S., Orlando wasn't required to enter a plea in Nicaragua. Steve Cornwell was starting to get nervous. After a while, Cornwell and his office were asked to help the Nicaraguan prosecution team. They had 8 days to prepare for trial, and the Nicaraguan authorities agreed to use teleconferencing during the trial. Witnesses would testify from the Broome County DA's office to a court in Managua thousands of miles away, where a judge, instead of a jury, would decide Orlando's fate. The trial began on October 1st, 2019, with Haley's mother as the prosecution's first witness. Karen testified that her daughter had problems in her relationship with Orlando, that he wouldn't stop texting her and following her and driving by her house. While Karen was testifying, she saw Orlando on the screen. She described her experience in the following way. "I felt sad that he ruined so many people's lives. And then, as the trial went on, I became much more and more angry because he acted very arrogant, and almost as if he was there and he was bored." Haley's roommate, Josie Arton, also testified that Orlando had been possessive over Haley. Haley's ex-boyfriend, Kevin, told the judge about that time Haley's tires were slashed and said he believed it happened because he and Haley were together again. Binghamton police investigator, Carl Peters, took the judge through all the evidence in detail, including the surveillance footage. They also went through the evidence that consisted of a handwritten note that was found in Orlando's apartment, and Peters concluded the motive was likely jealousy. The pathologist, Dr. James Terzian, who conducted Haley's autopsy, also testified and said it was determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation by neck compression. District Attorney Steve Cornwell, who was overwhelmed by the evidence, said, "He choked her to death. He took Haley, who I believe may have been sleeping, and he choked the life out of her and left her there to rot. That is a sick, disturbed man that could take advantage of somebody he claimed to love and kill her because he couldn't have her." Orlando's defense attorney, Eduardo Ruby, argued that due to the influence of alcohol, Orlando was temporarily insane at the time of murder. And in an effort to prove it, he called a psychiatrist as his first and only witness. According to Dr. Ronald Lopez Aguilar, who was appointed by the court and talked to Orlando about what happened, Orlando had no recollection of what happened. He said he woke up after a night of heavy drinking and found Haley dead. The expert, Dr. Lopez Aguilar, couldn't confirm whether any of those statements were true, and he said there's no way to prove what Orlando's state of mind was at the time of the murder. He could only conclude there was nothing wrong with the defendant's current mental state. District Attorney Cornwell commented, "There is no evidence that he was drunk or on drugs. There's no evidence that he had some sleepwalking disorder and, commits murder in his sleep." Once both sides finished their statements, Judge Fabiola Betancourt gave Haley's family the last word, which is something that never happens in the U.S. before the verdict. These are the reaction words of Haley's mother to the judge's last word. "Haley was a beautiful, intelligent, and friendly girl. She was an aspiring nurse and had her whole life to look forward to. She was, and still is, my best friend. So, thank you for listening and letting me speak on behalf of my daughter." Afterwards, the defense attorney Cornwell expected at least a day of deliberation, but the judge shocked him by saying she would return with her verdict after a brief pause. After a tense hour and a half, the judge returned with a statement, which denounced violence against women, advocated for equal rights, and said Orlando disposed of Haley because he did not accept the fact she had control over herself. Orlando was then proclaimed guilty of femicide. Her parents were advised to try not to show any emotion in front of the cameras. Karen Anderson said, "It doesn't bring her back, and it doesn't give you that sense of, you don't really feel better, but you do feel like you can close the book on that chapter now and start trying to move forward and heal." She also spoke directly to Orlando. "I hope that you get the highest amount of years behind bars, because you deserve even more than that." In her decision, Judge Betancourt said Tercero took it upon himself to punish Haley for rejecting him. 2 weeks later, Orlando Tercero was sentenced to the maximum 30 years in prison. Some of Orlando's friends thought he didn't deserve the maximum punishment. None of his friends have seen him since his conviction, but some have received phone calls and letters. One of them was Ashley Lopez, who said he asked her to keep him in her prayers and to stay positive. They all still support him, and some of them, such as Stephanie Maroney, are even convinced of his innocence and believe the court missed some evidence in the process. Another of Orlando's high school friends who asked to remain anonymous thinks there is truth to Orlando's defense, that he was not in his right mind when Haley was killed, and that he could have been under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or something happening for him to act that way. None of his friends thought being under the influence can justify what happened, but the question of Orlando's state of mind remains somewhat a mystery. Orlando's defense attorney wants a new psychiatrist to take a look at the case, if an appeal court allows it. Defense attorney Cornwell thinks Orlando is a killer who probably would have killed somebody else someday, even if he avoided killing Anderson. On the morning of February 4th, 2020, Orlando Tercero was back in a Nicaraguan courtroom to appeal his conviction. He was heavily guarded before a panel of 3 magistrates. Orlando's trial attorney, Eduardo Ruby, was still in charge of the case, and was again arguing that Tercero was highly intoxicated and temporarily insane at the time of the murder. He wanted a new psychiatric evaluation by a forensic psychiatrist who specializes in temporary insanity defenses. Haley's friend, Josie Arton, found it hard to believe that Orlando couldn't remember killing her friend. She thought that being a nursing student, Orlando would recognize that the person in front of him is dying and stop strangling her. Trial attorney argued that Orlando was wrongly charged with femicide and sentenced to 30 years, while in the US he was charged with second-degree murder and would probably face a lighter sentence with the possibility of parole. The magistrates almost immediately considered and rejected the request for a second psychiatric opinion. When it comes to Tercero's sentence, they said they would need time to deliberate and that at this moment, they will not issue a resolution. Almost 3 weeks later, the 48 Hours team was back in New York waiting for a decision from the court in Nicaragua. They did an interview with Karen Anderson in a room that used to be Haley's, where Karen kept her daughter's ashes. Karen explained she wanted to do the interview to honor Haley. She wanted Haley's death to have some purpose in life and to bring femicide to attention in the United States, as it is on the rise and considered a very serious crime. She said she wished there was a femicide law in the United States. On March 10, 2020, nearly 2 years after their daughter was murdered, Karen and Gordon Anderson were again at the Broome County DA's office to hear the court's decision. The hearing lasted over an hour, while an officer of the court read the decision on 12 pages. In the end, it took a nervous Karen Anderson a moment to realize that the appeal had been completely denied. She said she appreciated all the work that the court and the defense attorney have done in helping to convict Orlando to the fullest extent of the law. Orlando Tercero will likely spend the next 30 years in Nicaragua's main penitentiary, known for being overcrowded. Every day, he will be fed a small meal of rice and beans. If he wants more food, his mother will have to deliver food to the prison gates. Defense attorney Cornwell said if Tercero ever gets freed for some reason and tries to step foot on American soil, Broome County will arrest him and put him on trial on behalf of the family. Haley's family and friends are determined to keep her memory alive. Some of her friends, Jessie Bua, Josie Arton, Sydney Matuzak, commented that even though her time was short, she touched so many people's lives, that she is happy, innocent, pure, content, kind, generous, and hardworking, and most of all, that she loved almost everyone she came in contact with. When asked by the journalist how does she want her daughter to be remembered, Karen Anderson concluded, "As the millennial hippie that just was quirky and happy, and as sad as it is that she trusted everybody, that's a good quality. You should trust people." This is the case of a relationship that began as a mutual romantic attraction, but ended in the worst possible way. Millions of people break up and get rejected every day, and yet they don't commit a murder. So, why was this case different? Was it due to the influence of a substance? And what was happening that night between Haley and Orlando? Could the murder have been prevented somehow? It is difficult to say. But what is important is that judges have made their decision based on clear evidence under difficult circumstances, as the trial occurred in 2 separate countries. The memory of Haley Anderson will be cherished by all those who loved her. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel because that makes this video possible. And here is another one you might enjoy.